One of the most dangerous spies America ever faced didn't need a sub-miniature spy camera. She didn't need to smuggle stolen files either. Not in a purse, not in a briefcase, not in any kind of bag. She had something far more terrifying. A memory so sharp she could walk out of the Pentagon with nothing in her hands, yet carry everything she needed to betray the United States in her head for 17 years. 17 years! That's how long Belén Montes lived a double life in which a variety of seriously robust memory techniques helped her enact multiple crimes against the state. By the end of this tutorial, you'll know the spy-grade techniques Montes relied on while working as a senior analyst at the United States Defense Intelligence Agency. You'll also be treated to a special resource that gives you exercises so that you not only can reproduce the memory techniques that enabled her to lock secrets in her mind, but also to avoid the fatal error that ultimately cracked Montes when the heat started closing in and then started to grip the spy they caught. Now, why would I disclose such powerful mental tactics? Not so you can deceive, but so that you can achieve. To pass exams when the pressure's high, to deliver speeches without notes, to think clearly when stress makes everyone else blank. Now, the first step is to understand what it was that Montes memorized. That way you'll get a better sense of what the techniques are, what they're good for, why they work, and how to make sure you get it right so you don't undermine your own efforts. So, for anyone reading Code Name Blue Wren, which I highly recommend, this is a book about Montes' life as a spy, it will not come to any surprise that Montes wasn't stockpiling trivia in the mental safe of her mind. Far from it, at least in the beginning. Montes used ancient memory techniques like memory palaces, the major system, alphabetical associations, and so on to memorize top secret reports and sometimes entire pages of classified information, in some cases passages word for word. So that's the major type of information that Montes memorized and retained: facts, figures, entire sentences. And if she had stuck to information of that kind, she might still be happily spying away and acting on her criminal agenda. But ultimately, she wound up weakening her efforts by having to juggle a kind of trivia that we'll discuss in a moment. Now, the point for now is that if you want to improve your memory skills and then keep those mental skills sharp, do not dilute your memory by memorizing anything but the most important information. Now, obviously, there's a place for fun facts and so on, but keep in mind that the more you memorize information that has an impact, the more important your brain is going to feel. Now, that can boost your ego and lead to traps, but you can also be quite realistic, and it's good to memorize important information. Okay, so the second thing that I want you to understand is that Montes didn't rely on the memory techniques that we're going to talk about later entirely alone. At least, not exactly. And here's something that I think a lot of people might miss if they read this book, which is why I think we need to pause on this point, because Montes didn't pick up a phone in most cases to relay the information she had stolen via memorization. No, she would walk out of the Pentagon and type it all from memory, sometimes line for line, other times based on keywords, other times just typing out statistical data. And this information was then saved on encrypted disks, and sometimes there was a kind of double encryptographic system working, but it first had to be committed to memory and then typed out. Now, why is this typing out from memory point so important? Well, I've taught memory techniques as the founder of the magnetic memory method for over 15 years, and thousands of people have used the teaching that I myself use very, very successfully. And that's why I'm convinced this writing detail matters so much. It's also potentially one of the most valuable additions you can make as a lifelong learner, and yet so many people at our time are relegating writing to machines. You see, when Montes memorized the information she stole as a spy and then retyped it for the enemies of the United States, she was not copying it in any strict sense of the word copying. She was rebuilding it and exercising various levels of memory skill at the same time. Every keystroke was like a push-up for her brain, for her language skills, and for critical thinking, and all of this got working at once. Here's another layer of detail to consider in order to put a finer little line on this. Because Monty's colleagues were looking at a heck of a lot more than just good writing. They were looking at a feedback loop. So, if you want to sharpen your memory, write. The act of writing creates exactly that, a feedback loop. And the more that you engage that loop, the stronger your memory gets. Try it yourself. Rewrite one paragraph from memory tonight. As I shared in my deep dive study of Benjamin Franklin, doing exactly that, reading something, recalling it, and writing it out in his own words, helped make Benjamin's career, as multifaceted as it was, amazing. So you can write things out exactly by using memory techniques to memorize it verbatim, or you can just write out your own version. Either way, the better you get at writing, the more you'll remember. You'll have both passive and active memory exercise. Now, writing is also on my mind after recently completing a new book called Vitamin X, which is in this strange evidence bag for a reason I'll share in a minute. But this book has something to do with spies and moles and the power of writing for better memory. And as I worked on this book, I was getting both active and passive memory recall and working on sharpening my prose. And it really does make me remember the book better and better because of working on making the prose better and better. So sharper prose makes your ideas clearer to yourself when you revisit them, even if you're reading your own writing. And then when you have to recall things under stress, well, it's even easier because you've practiced working with the information in multiple formats. And plus, it's just easier to retrieve details under stress when you've practiced that information in a variety of ways, and especially practicing for clarity. So in other words, every sentence Monty's memorized, it gave her multiple levels of practice, techniques embedded within techniques that continually tightened her recall skills. And to be clear, the relationship between writing and better memory is not isolated to Anna Montes. The author Umberto Eco, he praised combining memory techniques and writing in many ways. I mean, his novel, The Name of the Rose, is quite astonishing in terms of how it involves memory. But he also wrote quite a lovely letter to his nephew, and he gave this stern command, "Train your memory," he wrote. But there's one passage in particular I want to highlight. It is important to note that you can do this not only with the help of books and magazines, but also by using the internet, which you need to use not only to communicate with your friends, but to enter into a dialogue with the history of the world. In other words, Eco advised his nephew to do a lot of reading, a lot of memorizing, and especially a lot of writing, and practice all three things together. Now, I can give you many, many other examples of people who have paired the use of memory techniques with writing, but the core point is that we don't want to think that Monty's just memorized information in order to smuggle secrets. That's a huge part of it. But it's also the combination of these activities. So if you want to make the truth unforgettable to yourself, pass exams, learn languages, and become an overall better citizen on planet Earth, well, take a quick writing exercise right now. Summarize the lesson that I maybe have been a bit too repetitive with in your own words, and type it in the comments. It's that simple. And while you're at it, join my mission to help everyone on the planet experience better memory by getting subscribed if you're new here, and smash that thumbs up button like James Bond downing a freshly shaken martini so more people discover the truth about what really works to improve mind and memory. I'm serious. The more we get together to work on the martial arts of the mind, the better the world gets for all of us. And we do need a better world, because here's the thing. Memory cuts both ways. So before we get into how Monty's memorized the reports so that she could retype them word for word or in a different way that we'll also discuss, here's another part of the Monty's story unfolded in code name Blue Wren that just absolutely jumped out at me. Monty's memory skills dazzled everyone around her. Her boyfriend once remarked at how she could remember details that slipped past everyone else. But more than that, her boyfriend remarked that Monty sometimes seemed to mentally vanish, as if she simply, quote unquote, wasn't there. Now, to me, that is memory cutting both ways. You see, if you use memory techniques often enough, deeply enough, and in a way incorrectly, you could indeed appear disassociated to others. Now, as I mentioned, Monty's used an ancient mnemonic tool called the Memory Palace technique, but the problem is that Monty's split her focus between using that technique to steal secrets and maintain multiple levels of deception. The longer your web of deception, the more mental navigation it requires to manage the threads. And this is especially important to know when using memory palaces. So if it's new to you, let me detail this technique a little bit more. And even if you think you already know it, please pay close attention so you avoid errors that weaken the memory you're trying to strengthen. So the memory palace technique involves mentally navigating rooms and hallways to recover information you've encoded in familiar places. Facts are firm, a date, a location. They are put into place, and then you just use this technique to revisit them. So if it's Anna Montes and you want to remember that name, I would have my friend Anna maybe over in the bookshelf, and then I would have a mountain, and that helps me remember Monty. So Anna on a mountain, and maybe she's there with Monty Python or Monty Hall or whoever. And that's a fact, and it's useful information, and it can be used to help other people, like I'm trying to help you now. But lies are brittle. Trying to juggle fake birthdays, fake jobs, fake stories for years, well, one slip and the whole web snaps. That's why when we memorize stories, it's for the details that we often have to work the hardest, and we want to sometimes memorize stories verbatim. Because you might know this, if you've ever told a story to a child twice and slipped on a detail, you know their minds track every single word. So, zoning out the way that Monty's boyfriend describes, that risk is real. My suggestion? Don't memorize lies, and you'll be fine. Or if you're telling stories, make it clear that you're telling a story and be open about any innovations that you're making. And if you're using memory palaces, understand this mission-critical point. Like many skills, you can use the memory palace technique in a casual way, or as we do in the magnetic memory method world, you can get super focused on all the granular details and improve your practice with it as a lifelong pursuit. Now, it doesn't happen to me often, but I too am sometimes physically present and mentally absent when using the technique, especially when sitting for exams, demonstrations of memory at live events, or when I'm first learning new vocabulary and phrases in a foreign language. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, I teach a technique called recall rehearsal that reduces this problem of zoning out, so to speak, because you don't ever want to actually have to go into a memory palace. It'll sometimes happen that you do need to, but if you're a detailed learner who prizes maximum accuracy, recall rehearsal is very, very powerful. So if you want to see a real-time example of me disassociating and entering a memory palace to get back on track when I had to manage something, there was a TEDx talk that I gave. The audience laughed at an unexpected moment, and my mind went blank just for a second. But thanks to recall rehearsal, I was actually able to get back on track within seconds without having to go back into a memory palace, at least not as such. I even sat with a 2 times Guinness World Record holder for memory and did not too bad for a guy who swallowed his pills with Guinness on the way to the memory competition. It's not really that funny, but such was the extent of how I was trying to quiet my mind. So I went home. So for a split second, I looked there like a deer in headlights. But thanks to my Memory Palace training and recall rehearsal, I was back in action right away. Anyway, let me call back to my previous point to deepen our lesson. In addition to practicing with the Memory Palace technique and making sure that the entire speech was in long-term memory, I also practice a lot of writing. I wrote the speech, and I wrote it in the service of the truth. So all of that stuff helped me. And at the risk of repetition, let me repeat the key points so far so that they're clear. 1, better memory is not just about using memory techniques. It's about additional techniques like regular writing. And when it comes to speeches, also using recall rehearsal so that if you blank out or dissociate, you can get back into the room quickly. And the second point is that Montes had no choice but to be physically present while being mentally absent because she had muddied the waters of her mind. The stolen secrets? Well, memorizing those details is actually a good thing if you're using the information in the service of the good. And as far as I know, there is no surefire way to practice managing so many lies under pressure. There's no way to get golden. I just don't know how you would do that. But that's part of what the novel Vitamin X is about, how that might be possible. But of course, it's a story and it teaches you a particular memory technique so that you can experiment with it. But you stuff up, you tell one lie in an incorrect way, it's going to get harder and harder and harder to remain present and access what you need. It becomes an avalanche of noise. So please make sure that you always practice all these skills, but in the service of the truth. Okay, for your next tip, it's important to understand the difference between verbatim memorization versus when it's useful to strip information down to the bone. I'm talking about the skill of selective compression. Whether it's for written exams that require long passages, or you're writing reports at work, or you have summaries that you want to write for yourself to help your own learning projects settle into long-term memory. We can't always afford to memorize everything verbatim, and nor could Montes. But neither could she afford to carelessly summarize the information she was stealing. A misremembered figure in a date or a financial amount that's just one digit wrong, that could change everything. The tiniest missed detail could blow the success of an assignment. And, whether you're a spy or not, that's really, really important. You could fail an exam. You could lose a promotion at work. So you want to train yourself to use your memory in 2 different ways. Whenever possible, you want to filter information and reduce it down to its essence. In some cases, just a keyword extracted from a sentence will do, just enough to reconstruct and rebuild the full context later with accuracy. Now, I know a lot of people will say, but I'm worried that I'll forget the nuances and the details. If you practice the keyword condensation method, you'll find that you do remember more of the context, but you kind of have to take the risk and just get started with it. But another thing that you might do, and I don't know if Montes did this for a fact, but you can practice another technique where you condense phrases down into letters like this: JEKTRARTFCLWA. And then if you actually did this, drop those letters in a memory palace and so forth, you can expand them back to a full sentence later. So what the heck did all those letters JEKTRARTFCLWA mean? Well, it was that sentence, just enough words to reconstruct and rebuild the full context later with accuracy. Now, this strategy is sometimes called the initial letter technique. Please practice it from time to time. I talked in my previous video on this channel about how I used it with Shakespeare. If there be nothing new but that which is have been before, how are our brains beguiled? And that was just basically reconstructing the letters. It's very, very powerful to do every once in a while. And for your memory improvement journey, I recommend that you practice all these skills Be able to memorize word for word, be able to memorize keywords, and be able to boil things down into this weird initial letter concept. And practice it with formulas, song lyrics, quotations. Anything that you know in the real world, you'll be accountable for. Practice with anything that is challenging, but manage the challenge frustration curve. What that means is always make sure you're pushing yourself, but not so far that you get frustrated and just want to give up. That's a practice unto itself. And another thing is practicing finding the main points, understanding what the main points are, and then memorizing just those main points and developing a kind of feel for it. And you start tonight. Pick a couple passages from, say, 2 books and memorize one sentence verbatim, and then find a paragraph and reduce it down to 1 or 2 core ideas and just memorize 2 or 3 words, even just a single word. Then later, get a piece of paper and write out verbatim what you memorized from the first book, and then write out just the keywords, but then also expand those keywords in your own words so that you're getting practice of both. And this is going to really, really give you a nice, balanced, holistic strengthening of your memory. Now, one of the saddest lessons of all that leapt out at me while reading this book, it's really something to consider. Memory doesn't care about morality. It really doesn't. Neither does the human brain necessarily. No, human memory serves whoever trains it. And that means not only can it cut both ways in terms of being present, but also needing to dissociate yourself, but it can serve the bad guys. And in the Montes case, the same system that made her unstoppable really caused a lot of harm. Ultimately, it also exposed her in the end because when the stress overwhelmed her, the cracks widened. Too many fake details needed to be managed, and so her once lethal recall became brittle. Now, this isn't because the memory techniques failed, but because Montes bogged her mind down with lies, and she increasingly needed to rely on an encryption and decryption cheat sheet. So she wound up ultimately carrying something in her purse, and then that cheat sheet was found. So bog your mind down with lies instead of useful facts, and it doesn't matter how skilled you are with memory techniques. If you have to have an external device or a piece of paper that helps you, well, you open yourself up to being unprepared. And we all know that where preparation meets opportunity, there is no ceiling, but the opposite is also true. So if you don't train your memory deliberately and fill it with good information in the service of the good, you'll wind up in trouble at the end of the day. And your memory will abandon you. So let me share something a little personal with you before we get to one major tip that you're not going to want to miss. Codename Blue Wren here was suggested to me by one of you very, very valuable subscribers. Thank you for that. And it wound up becoming accidentally part of the research for this memory detective novel in the evidence bag here. Now it's in the evidence bag because I carried it around all over Australia and it's hot and sweaty and books get a little bit decayed here. But anyway, I thought I'd save the editing version for, whatever. Maybe my wife can sell it one day if I if I die in a spy mission. But at the end of the day, Vitamin X is the sequel to Flyboy, my first memory detective novel, which many people tell me they loved.
Flyboy. Anthony, you outdone yourself this time. I had so much fun reading this, not only because I love memorizing, but also that it reignited a lot of joy that I had in reading stories, and I was following along and enjoyed it, and it felt like a video game in my mind going through this book. I think that the motivation I had going through the book to memorize kind of transformed my mind in many different ways that I didn't even notice. One is my approach to memorization just became more fun. Number two, I found myself thinking about memory in a whole different way, and I don't think I would have ever gotten that if I wouldn't have read this book. I'm so excited about the design. I love the design. And I also love that this is part of a series, and I cannot wait to read more. But you outdid yourself this time, brother. A+.
And the idea of memory growing stronger and weaker at the same time, well, that's a lot of what happens to Detective Williams at the same time after someone exposes him to a drug called vitamin X, or codenamed vitamin X. So to celebrate completing this very challenging novel and its upcoming launch, I've put together a very fun course that will help you learn more about these techniques, including one that we didn't talk about today for memorizing numbers. And it's all minus the lies and minus the damage and all about using your memory virtuously. So sign up with the link below and you'll get advance notice for the launch of Vitamin X plus free access to Operation Memory Mastery. It's free, it's fun, and it will give you memory control that makes you unshakable when the heat is on. So I promised you one final tip to carry with you. So with thanks to everybody for hitting that thumbs up and being subscribed to this channel, many people think that you need to practice memory techniques for hours on end. This simply is not true. My friend Dave Farrow, who holds 2 Guinness World Records in memory, at least he did the last time I checked, he trains his memory in short bursts. And when he commits things to memory in order to establish Guinness World Records, also in really, really short blasts. And I do the same. Now, Dave Farrow, if memory serves, is like 10 to 15 minute range in his practice and his absorption of information. I sometimes do shorter than that, sometimes longer memorization sessions. But either way, if even world record holders for memory, and Dave Farrow is also an accomplished entrepreneur, if he doesn't cram, why would you? Personally, I've memorized over 2,000 words in Sanskrit, thousands of details from what probably is thousands of books, and I've done it all in short blasts, a little bit longer than what Dave does, but nonetheless, I don't cram. If a metaphor helps, you can think about the reading and the encoding and the decoding, and also the writing as micro windows of practice. And instead of scrolling the next time you're on the bus or the train or blasting your mind with internet dopamine during your next lunch break, run a quick mental briefing on something that you've already learned by writing out, ideally in handwriting, what you've learned. Carry a notebook so you can practice randomly and summarize key points from what you're learning a couple times a day. Train your procedural memory to create a feedback loop between recall and writing, and then rewriting a couple of times to just get it into long-term memory that much more firmly. You will thank yourself for it very soon. And keep that first initial technique in mind to practice every once in a while. Build these longer, nonsensical acronyms, but when you look at that word later, you can unpack what it means. This is the kind of training that transforms ordinary days into a lifelong system of mastery. Anna Belén Montes didn't need to carry documents in and out of the Pentagon, just like I managed to pass my PhD without carrying books from the library into the room. But she did ultimately wind up carrying something because of the damage that she did. You can avoid that error and easily carry all kinds of information in your mind. So after you sign up for advance notice for Vitamin X and Operation Memory Mastery, stick with me on this channel and watch a video I made for the launch of the first memory detective novel that shows what memory techniques Sherlock Holmes would have used if he were a real detective. The link for that video should appear for you somewhere on the screen and in the description below. Until then, thanks again, and from my memory palace to yours, I remind you to keep your wits sharp by keeping your learning honest and keeping your memory magnetic.